I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, do we have any comments from the audience on items that are not on the agenda? Oh, I see we have a guest.
You do.
Mr. Schaefer, how are you?
I'm good. Eric Schaefer, STPUD ratepayer. And I did notice.
Good. We like more
I
of
did
you.
notice the increase when my wife came into me and said, "Do you know what they just?" No.
I think we look compared to South Tahoe Refuse. We look good by comparison.
And well, yeah, but in the age where we need comparisons to look good, I guess that's okay. I'm always surprised that. Well, let's see. I guess I am the only person that's not associated with the district or an agenda item at this meeting, and that saddens me a bit. I get the agenda on email, and I read it, and I thought, there is a lot of good news in this agenda. Look at all of the projects that have been completed. Look at the new financing that's coming through at an unbelievable rate. And it's just unfortunate that the people of this community don't understand the good things that are happening here. So I want to commend the board for all of the good work and the leadership you've provided for getting all of these things done. But you wouldn't be able to accept commendations other than for the good work of the employees of the district. I want to especially recognize them for all the hard work they put in and for all of these good accomplishments. And so I guess the real thing that the board has done is stay out of the way of all the good work that they can do and then just tag along and take credit. So good for you. Thank you.
I'll agree with that, and thank you for those compliments, and I'm sure the staff is welcome too. Along those lines, John, you threw out a number the other day. This summer was or this year is like a record for construction spending. Is that right?
Yeah, we had it earlier, this construction season, like $21.5 billion projects in progress. So, yeah, that was a record, I think. I mean, there's a lot of special things about this construction season. I mean, just the types of projects, diversity of projects, the dollar amount, and I mean, we're stretched from state line all the way up to Woodford. So, a lot of iron in the fire, a lot of great work done by second what Eric said, I mean, we appreciate the support of the board.
And many of our past board members set a good example, some of whom are in this room.
Okay, do we have any corrections to the agenda or consent calendar? How about a motion?
I'll move approval of consent calendar.
I'll second that.
And that passed unanimous. Thanks. Yes. Oh, sure.
The financing that was achieved on the project that's going to be going on, and the generator or something.
The generator one,
Yeah.
right? How do you like that interest rate?
Well, I think you should really be impressed how remarkable that is. And the ease with which this whole thing got accomplished. I think that, putting together a plan that didn't involve having to go out to public financing was really good. You should be aware that tax-exempt financing for municipal agencies is coming under fire. It has been for a number of years in Congress, but it's heating up because they're looking for more ways to balance budgets. Not to reduce spending, but to balance budgets. And as of this morning, there is an appeal from CASA to have member agencies write a letter in support of an item they're trying to get through dealing with keeping alive tax-exempt financing for bond refunding projects. That's pretty critical if you want to refinance to get a lower rate. That's what's called a bond refunding, and those are on the list of things to be chopped as a 1/1/18.
You think that'll hold up once they go through the reconciliation process?
I think it's getting closer to being reality, because in the grand scheme of things, they're looking for things that they can cut that don't appear to have direct social issue, and that would be one. Although, you know, it doesn't make any sense in my mind, because with the lack of federal government stepping up to help local agencies and state agencies help with infrastructure projects, this is a valuable mechanism that is needed in order to finance these things. And so I would encourage the district to write a letter that is in support of that, to delay somehow that chopping of the advanced refunding mechanism. And also would just like to acknowledge that I think it's still proper and valuable for the district to be members of CASA and AQUA and continue providing support to those organizations as they work towards doing things that are most appropriate for agencies like this one in the United States. So,
Thanks.
Thank you.
I know we're in the comment period, but just real quick, just to wrap up that conversation, the advanced refundings that are on the chopping block, that's doing a refinance.
Sorry.
A refinance before the actual call date of your bonds or your debt. So it's refinancing it earlier than you're typically allowed, and usually you have a penalty associated with that. But if the interest rates have dropped far enough, it's still worth doing it. But that's what's on the chopping block. Hopefully not all refinancings, but we have, and probably 5 years ago, we did do one of those advanced refundings and saved a lot of money. So yeah, we really don't want to see any of it go away, and it makes me nervous because it feels like it's step one towards eliminating tax-exempt financing, like what's his name was talking about.
He used to be Director Schaefer, now he's just what's his name?
President Schaefer.
And just one other comment on our payment of claims. We have our annual dues for CASA and AQUA being approved today. So, was that why you commented?
Well, he makes a good point. Some of the meetings you go to are a little bit boring, but the where the rubber meets the road is where they're doing advocacy work. When that's actually the way I look at it. Because I don't always understand all the engineering stuff that they're talking about, but I do understand the political stuff, and it's important too.
Okay. Thanks for those comments. We appreciate that. I guess, Julie, you're up. We're going to talk about the wastewater treatment plant energy audit.
Yes, thank you. I'm here today to request approval of a task order for Carollo Engineers to help us with a wastewater treatment plant energy audit. This audit will be focused primarily, specifically upon the aeration system. The district was awarded a $35,000 grant from the State Water Resources Control Board. There's no match requirement for that grant. It's just $35,000 for us to use, and so we reached out to Carollo because of their familiarity with our SCADA system, with our wastewater treatment plant processes, to help us take a look at where we might be able to add flexibility and additional instruments at our aeration basins to help us shave some energy costs at the plant. When we originally started talking about where to focus with such a small pot of money, the first thought was, well, let's take a look at the wastewater treatment plant as a whole. But there are three really large consumers of energy within the plant. There's the final and secondary pumping system. There's the solid handling system at the centrifuges, and then there's the aeration system. And those other two systems, the final pumps and the solids handling facility, are relatively new. And so we weren't confident that we would find a lot of benefit from looking at the plan as a whole until we look more closely at the aeration basins. And so that's our intent, is we will work with Carollo to develop a monitoring system that we can put in place and track for a year. Then they'll write us a report making recommendations for where we can hopefully make some permanent improvements on the aeration system to see some cost savings. We spend between $600,000 and $1 million a year on power for the wastewater treatment plant, and we expect that the aeration basin accounts for somewhere between 25 and 40% of that. But we don't have a power meter on the aeration system at this point. So that's one of the first instruments that we'll buy. So the $37,100 that's included in the Carollo's task order, that'll use the bulk of it'll use all of the grants to pay for it. And then once we have a work plan from them, we'll come back and make a request for purchasing instruments, including a power meter and including some other instruments for aeration basin number 2 that we'll monitor for a year. So all told, I expect that this effort will cost us on the order of $135,000 to $150,000 to really get a handle on where we might see some savings in our energy consumption at that part of the treatment process.
So that's a significant capital outlay in hopes that it will be recovered in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Through reduced energy costs.
Yeah. Based on our current expenditures and how much we expect is the percent consumption, if we spend $125,000 on instruments, we expect that we will recover that in energy savings in about 5 years. So that's a pretty good payback.
Just in being able to identify the inefficient processes.
Exactly. That would be if we get somewhere between just a modest improvement, 5 to 10% reduction in energy consumption would lead us to paying off those instruments in about 5 years.
Else have any questions?
I'll move approval. I'll second.
Okay, is that enough? Move approval?
You want more?
Do we need to know what we're approving, Dwayne?
Well, I
Already seconded.
we'll see if we get away with it. But I'll add on, approve the proposal from Carollo Engineers for engineering services in an amount not to exceed $37,100 to conduct an energy audit of the secondary treatment process at the wastewater treatment plant. Period.
Okay, thank you.
Want to second that too?
I'll second it.
Okay, that's passage unanimous. Thanks. Mr. Coolidge, I think you're up next.
Thank you. Trevor Coolidge, Associate Engineer. I'm here to discuss approval of task order number 10 for Far West Engineering for the Keller Heavenly Water System Improvement Project. Just to give you a little bit of backup, this is what we're looking at is one of our El Dorado County Water Agency funded contracts. We have a 50% match on that. So good news is a lot of this money is coming back from El Dorado County Water Agency, which helped fund the initial study that looked at a variety of alternatives. During that study, Far West Engineering looked at a variety of improvements to the Keller Heavenly area. This is coming from our Keller tanks, some of our highest tanks up by Keller. They're also the oldest tanks that we still have in service short of flagpole. These are steel tanks with unbolted foundations with pretty precarious rock structures above them. So we're looking at ways to provide water reliability, provide quality water, improve redundancy in one of our older areas of the system. And that ranged from upsizing mains on Keller, replacing the Keller booster station, intertying zones, replacing PRVs, looking at alternative tank sites, possibly over close to Heavenly. So we looked at a number of alternatives. We came up with some primary outcomes include reusing the Keller site as the most effective, most cost effective and most constructible site with the fewest easement issues. We looked at the Keller station, realized we couldn't move it very far due to hydraulic issues and that it's in pretty good shape, so we're looking at adding instrumentation to that. We looked at our PRVs, and we'll adjust some of their locations to improve maintenance access. One of them's on the blind corner on Keller, and our guys don't like getting into it. But we'll make those easier to maintain. We'll make those more reliable, perform more effectively. We'll also instrument those to get a better idea of what's going on in that area. One of the issues we're facing throughout our system, but particularly in that area, is when the power goes off, we don't necessarily know what level our tanks are at, whether we should be pumping our wells or not. And so we operate blind, or we have to send crews up to those areas. And in the winter, that can be pretty tough to go up and bang on a tank or check a level or a gauge to see how full a tank is. We also, one of the big outcomes that's saving a lot and allowing us to have the storage capacity at that site is tying over to the Heavenly tank. Heavenly tank has very large capacity. It was oversized for snowmaking, and we're able to rely on that capacity to bring water back into these zones that we examined, and that's letting us reduce the size of the storage required at the Keller site. So we did a lot of optimization. We tried to look at what was most cost effective, most consistent with our water system optimization plan, and then those elements are packaged in what you have before you for the design package that Far West will be providing. We anticipate it'll be constructed over 3 years. That's looking at preparing a tank site, implementing tanks, and then finalizing improvements through the system. So probably over 3 construction seasons that'll be carried out. So that's why if you look at the fine print, you'll see support for potentially up to 3 bid packages that are included in this. They do not, while they include through bid, they do not include construction support in this. So I just want to clarify that. But with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I also have Matt from Far West Engineering, Matt Van Dyne with Far West Engineering present, if there's something that I can't handle.
Well, I'm just not seeing a lot of curiosity from the board today. No, I know. We've actually talked about this project quite a bit over the last couple of years, and its impending need, and so it's good that we're finally going through with it, I think. So.
Thank you. And one thing I don't want to forget, we are moving forward very quickly with a state revolving fund loan application to fund the construction phase. That generally has about a year lead time. We're looking at about a year timeline for these construction documents to be finalized, so I will be coming back to you to request environmental review support that's required for our funding application, potentially at the next board meeting, but that's a much smaller number. But if there are no questions, I would request the board approve task order number 10 to Far West Engineering for design services for the Keller Heavenly Water System Improvements Project in the amount not to exceed $316,573.
So moved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor. And that passes 5-0. Okay, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you.
Talked about this a little bit earlier, but you have the floor.
Did. So for your consideration is Resolution 3072-17, which approves the installment sale financing agreement to fund the wastewater treatment plant emergency generator project. And as the man in the blue shirt pointed out, we did receive a very favorable term on this financing. We issued requests for proposals on October 19th and received actually 13 responses on November 3rd, which was a very good response rate, with interest rates ranging from 2.2 to 3.83% and various terms of 15, 20, and 25 years. Chase Bank did propose the most attractive set of terms at 2.2% over 15 years. And at the current estimated project cost of $4.6 million, that creates an annual principal and interest payment of right around $363,000, which was almost identical to what we put in the forecast last year when we developed the budget, which included this project. So we're right on task there. We actually locked in the terms of that loan the very next day, and overnight the rate actually dropped a little bit more, down from 2.2 to 2.18%, so it's very favorable terms. The resolution that I described, and actually it's been edited and distributed to all of you up there, and I'll point out the changes in just a moment. It authorizes execution of the installment sale agreement, the assignment agreement, the cost of issuance custodian agreement, and the engagement of Jones Hall, a professional law corporation, as our bond counsel. So there were 3 changes to the resolution compared to when the agenda item was actually developed. The first one actually broadens the scope of the project. It adds the language that says, and any other capital improvements to the district's wastewater system is determined by the district. The reason we added that language in there is because we have an outstanding grant application right now with FEMA, and if we're awarded it, it will go towards this project. And so that will mean we'll have $1.2 million left over the loan funds that we want to apply to future projects, most notably the Big 5 analysis or whatever, the projects coming out of that. So that'll allow us to use the money for something other than the wastewater treatment plant. And then the next change is adding language which includes the approval of an assignment agreement. And because the installment sale agreement has to be assigned from the Public Property Finance Corporation to Chase Bank, so that language was added. And then there was a piece of language removed, which was requiring an ESCO agreement, and that is no longer required. It was originally drafted that way because the bank was considering the loan as more of a reimbursement loan, which means we wouldn't get the money until we experience an expenditure on the project. And that's been changed, though, so they're just going to forward us all the money up front, and we will deposit it with our investment brokers, and so we'll earn some interest on it as we spend it down. And then the last addition is the approval of a cost of issuance custodian agreement, which is an agreement that will be with Bank of New York, and they hold and distribute the fees that go to the various parties that were involved with this financing, including the bond counsel and the financial advisor. So the staff recommendation is to approve Resolution 3072-17, authorizing and directing the execution of an installment sale financing of public capital improvements with Public Property Finance Corporation of California and related documents, and incorporating the changes as described by district staff.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Is there any questions or discussion before we vote on this? Okay, let's do it. No, we're staring at nothing. I'm sure you all know that Dwayne and I went over all this at a finance committee meeting a couple weeks ago. So looked really good to us at that time, and nothing's changed since then.
Yeah, I was amazed with the interest rate. Still don't know.
And that passes unanimous. Thanks. Payment of claims.
I move approval of payment of claims in the amount of $1,326,520.77.
I'll second it. And unanimous. Okay, next we move on to standing and ad hoc committee reports. I guess I'll go first. On Friday the 16th, week and a day from today, we're having our meeting with the city again. Does anybody have any we kind of know what we're going to talk about on this one, but does anybody have any items that with the city they'd like us to bring up?
I did talk to Nancy, and she was going to try to see if she could get Jennifer Lukens and the Talkies, Mr. Robotai over there at the meeting. I haven't heard back from her to see if she was successful.
Yeah.
But what has come to my attention is also that Evo has put out a meeting invitation for the stakeholder advisory group for our,
yeah.
For our groundwater sustainability agency efforts at the same time. So, depending upon which invitation you got first, Jennifer and Talkies may be already saying that they're busy on the 9th or at 9 o'clock on that Friday. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Just to let you guys know, I don't know if we brought this up in another meeting or not. Both the council members that we meet with, both Brooke and Wendy, are very concerned about this TBE problem and the plume and the apparent inaction by Lahontan to do anything about it. And so the purpose of the meeting was to discuss strategies on how to get Lahontan more involved, but yet be still a partner and a player with them as opposed to an adversary. So that's what we're kind of looking at. Anybody else have any into that? How about board member reports? Jim, you were at Aqua, weren't you?
Aqua meeting. I'll give a little report on that. I attended that last week along with Shannon was there, and Eva was there for several days. He was mostly there for the groundwater sessions, to which there were several. And but the first day, Monday, is dedicated to the JPIA. That's the insurance group, and there was discussion about some of the things they've done this past year and what they want to do in the future year. There's some talk, and they're looking into the possibility of creating a captive insurance company. Are you familiar with that, Paul? Okay, well, I try to explain a little bit. What they want to do is set up a bank, essentially, for the insurance company in Utah rather than in California. California's got such restrictive ordinances and whatever that don't allow us to get the best interest on a lot of projects. And the county supervisor, CSAC, has done this in this past year. They got about an 8.8% return on their money out of going to Utah and setting up this special account or bank.
How do I set up one of those?
I'd like to do that. Maybe we can do it for our accounts. But and the JPIA in California has only been able to get about 1.1%. So
yeah,
there's
something to, the old saying, if something sounds too good to be true, there's something wrong with it. 8.8.
Well, they want to look at it. It's something that quite a few agencies have gotten involved in. There's a couple of states, I think it was Vermont, there's another one where you could set up like an offshore account, but onshore, in the United States. And Utah is one. They only have like a $250 fee for a year, yeah,
but what are they doing to generate that, Shannon? Do you know?
What I understood is what they're doing essentially is it's a captive insurance company that basically operates out of Utah. It's a Utah company, and they take the excess funds that JPIA has, reserved for paying out claims. They take that money They put it in this other company, where right now in California they take that money and they invest it in a very narrow, limited, low risk investments. By going to Utah, they're able to take that money and put it into higher risk investments, which obviously has a risk associated with it, and generate a higher rate of return. It's my understanding that private insurers in California, private insurance companies in California do that. They're not limited to the restrictions that the JPIA as a government insurance company is not. Those other private agencies are not bound by that. So by sending this money to Utah, it releases those restrictions, and they're able to invest it like a private insurance company does, and generate those returns as well as that higher level of risk. There's definitely a lot of folks in the JPIA who are concerned. It's going to take them a lot of talking. This is not something they're going to move on quickly. It will probably be over the next couple of years that they do thorough investigation because they recognize that they don't know everything about it either. Apparently, though, this is a very common practice. A lot of companies do that. A lot of non-insurance companies do it, and those are the companies that tend to have problems and failures. Actual insurance companies, particularly government insurance companies, that do this type of thing have a long track record from other states of doing this and being very successful at it.
JPIA has maintains about $45 to $50 million in their account. That's to cover, the insurance claims and things like that. So that's something they're going to be talking about over the next year, and they're just beginning to get into it. But there are other agencies that have already done it and have done quite well. So then getting on to the regular part of the AQUA session, of which, the JPIA has about 220 members. That's out of about 415 AQUA members, about half of them. Some of the larger companies, water companies in the state, take care of their own insurance and aren't involved with it. So, but that covers about 6,000 employees. As far as their benefit program, the PPO, they're going to be raising about 4.5 for this next year. Is that the figure you've gotten? So it's about 4.5. There are other accounts, their claims, property, and some others are not being raised. They're pretty much stagnant as far as raises. Tuesday is the day for committees. There's and I attended water quality, groundwater, water management committees. There's also federal affairs that Shannon attended, and he can tell you about that. But there was a lot of talk about some of the legislation and what's happening with the lead ordinances that are coming down from Sacramento. Then the Wednesdays gets basically into the regular sessions with a lot of different issues covered. I attended several sessions on headwaters and climate change, on statewide issues, water and energy nexus. There was a consultant that was talking about what they can do to help, on energy and reducing the cost for water companies. There were several discussion in one session on the bond issues that are coming up this next year. There'll be one in June and one in November. And is it the SB 5? It's in June, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's for $4.7 billion. The one in the fall that Jerry Merrill is putting together is 8.7. So you got about $13.5 billion worth of bonds coming up. One of the biggest things they'll be putting in money into would be about $2.4 billion into forest management, and that's important. That's getting a lot of discussion at these sessions. I also attended or went through the exhibit hall. They had about 80 exhibitors there. It's always interesting to go see what the new technology is and talk to some of the people about what's happening there. That was good. We also had a chance to talk to Eric Saperstein, and several times he was there for the week. There were several luncheons that had some speakers. One of the kind of interesting one was Grant Davis, who's the new head of the Department of Water Resources. He was appointed just as the Oroville Dam was collapsing, and so he had to take on that responsibility. It was kind of interesting to hear about how they went in there and got the job done. The next meeting of AQUA is in Sacramento in May. I encourage anybody who wants to find out more about the water industry, the business of it, to attend. And going back, talking to Eric Saperstein, Eric, we talked about the CASA, and they're meeting at the end of January, and he encouraged me to come back to that because we just don't have anybody involved over the last few years since Mr. Schaefer's left.
Well, I've actually been twice.
Have you?
And
I went.
and I didn't go back again because honestly, I looked at the agenda and I didn't see anything that I thought provided any value at the past one. I'll take each one as they come up as they come.
Well, I was thinking if I'm going to be going to Washington for the CASA and the AQUA conference in the end of February, that it'd be good to attend the next meeting, which is at the end of January. So we can talk about that if you want to go.
We'll get a little closer. We'll take a look at it.
No,
I like to
can't wait
wait
to get too close because
Yeah, I know you got to get reservations. I just like to see the agenda and what's going on.
Agendas don't always tell you everything that's happening, and
I don't,
we get to talk to a lot
I
of
don't
people.
think we've seen the agenda yet for that CASA meeting.
It'll probably be coming out pretty soon.
Yeah.
I may want to go in February too. I find I'm torn because sometimes during the meetings I feel like I ought to be out meeting with our legislators, and I'm not real fond of the herd mentality where we all go in 20 at a time or 10 at a time.
You're talking about the one in D.C.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, we've had such success over the years as an aggregate. They get to know you and trust you, and then when you go back and you really need them, then they're there. And I'm absolutely convinced that's necessary to put a face back there every time, or a couple of faces. And the private meetings have been the ones that I've found with the legislators that I've found to be the most valuable. So we kind of, usually when there's a couple of us, we break that up. One of us does one thing, one does the other. It works out.
Well, we'll have a chance that they overlap the CASA and the AQUA conference. The CASA starts out the first of the week, and then the AQUA people get in about Wednesday, and there's some joint meetings actually. And then in the past, we've stayed over on Friday to make some of those meetings with Feinstein's office and McClintock's office, and as well as some of the Nevada delegation too. And it's, as Dwayne has said, it's good to keep that contact up because when you need them, they're there. They know who you are and what you're doing, and I think it's good.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Does anybody have any other board member reports?
I have a few. I'll try to be short.
Or AQUA. No.
Oh,
Shannon has some
Go ahead.
AQUA comments.
Oh, you want to jump in at this time,
Go ahead.
Shannon?
I can need to talk or wait till staff reports to talk about it.
Well, we're talking about it. Let's go ahead. Why don't we go ahead
Go
and do this
ahead.
now? Yeah.
So on the AQUA front, my notes are a little bit jumbled here. Starting out, since we were just talking about the federal issues, so what is in the past been called the Westerman Bill, which deals with the fire borrowing and the fire borrowing as well as forest management legislation. That has gotten a lot of traction, has gotten through the House. There's some expectation we actually may get that passed this year, which will greatly change, I think, potentially the landscape for forest management funding within the state or within the country. And so there's some obviously none of that's done until everybody votes, but there's some real potential for that to get passed this year or in the coming year.
what's the name of it again?
It's the Westerman Bill. I can't remember. It's historically, when it was started, it was called the Westerman Bill. That's who authored it.
639.
Maybe it is. I can't remember. I didn't write down what the actual bill number was or where it sits right now. More than likely, it will again it will get included in something else, and so be hidden as a line in another bill. But what we were hearing at the conference and from Eric is that certainly the fires in the Bay Area, reemphasize the need for that, and now with what's happening in Southern California, may well also push a lot more focus and a lot more interest in getting that bill passed. So fingers are crossed we may get some movement on the federal side with that.
One thing I've heard was that it may not get through the Senate this year, but they're going to try and take part of it and put it into the disaster bill that's for the hurricanes, that it would become part of that, and then they finish the rest of the management portion of it.
And the concern is that the fire borrowing gets addressed, and that actually relieves the pressure to get the forest management portion done. And the forest management portion, a big component of that is what would happen on a particular project, say a larger project. You get all the stakeholders in, everybody gets to advise and consent and participate in that, and then once they finish that upfront work, they get all the permits in place, you can't sue them. You can't sue and stop the project anymore. And so a lot of people are opposed to that. And so by getting that tied to the fire borrowing, it has much more chance of success as opposed to just being opposed roundly by the environmental opposition to that, because it removes some control from the environmental groups or the local community on what's happening there, because they can't stop the project after it's gone through that process.
Unfortunately, one of those persons is Dianne Feinstein.
And that's exactly right. Unfortunately, she's one of the strong oppositions to that, to the forest management portion of that. So she's up for re-election, so we have some opportunities to do some asks, so we can, when we're back there, we can definitely continue to make that request if we'll get traction with it. I'm not sure. The state issues in our next board meeting, since I didn't get it on the agenda, I'll bring a video that Aqua produced. I think actually was really good about talking about what they did last year and what they're really focused on this year. But to highlight a couple of legislative issues that were very much talked about at the conference, SB 623 and AB 401. These are two bills that are they're two ones. AB 401 is actually a piece of legislation that's already passed, but SB 623 is new. These are the water tax bills and the water tax efforts to fund disadvantaged communities as well as low-income rate assistance programs. Both of those programs are still going to get pushed very hard this year. Aqua and their partners were able to stop SB 623 from getting passed last year, and so it became a 2-year bill. It is one of the biggest issues of concern for water agencies across the state, because as soon as we start charging 95 cents an account, so that money goes to the disadvantaged communities for infrastructure improvements, that's issue, and that may all sound good. The problem is, we heard, for example, from an agency in Washington that they did exactly this in Washington. They started with a water tax to fund a specific program, and it was within 5 years, everybody just dogpiled onto that as this is a way to pay for things without passing a new tax, and people don't see it and they don't pay attention to it, and it just grew and grew and grew. So it's really is viewed as the camel's nose under the tent for taxing water and paying for a bunch of things that are not in the general fund, and has a lot of folks really, really concerned. So we'll be in opposition to that. There was comments about, there was some discussion at the State Ledge Committee that Aqua may be coming to the agencies to fund some polling and focus grouping efforts to try and craft opposition to those bills, advertising to those bills to try and stop that from happening. We'll see what their proposals are, but it's something that is something for us for the long term, could be very costly if this stuff gets passed. It may well be worth our while to make an investment in supporting Aqua in doing that, to be more effective at fighting those bills from passing. So it's something, obviously, if they bring it to us, we'll bring that back to the board and get your input before we go forward with it, before supporting that kind of effort. But it's definitely something that gives us concern. The other bill is stuff that we've talked about quite a bit here, and that is the mandatory water conservation efforts that are going on. Apparently, Governor Brown is pushing this hard and heavy. I don't know if this is a legacy issue for him or what's going on there, but he's definitely pushing these water budgets and giving the State Water Board the authority to set how much water we as a community can use by establishing a water budget for us and all the water agencies around the state. That conservation effort, again, Aqua was effective at fighting that last year. It's gonna get pushed as that bill became a 2-year bill, just like SB 623. It's going to be another big battle for Aqua this year, and something we'll be tracking very closely, weighing in on it every opportunity that we get to. So these are bills particularly that we're reaching out to our representatives, communicating with them, and making sure that they were all supportive of us. Of course, Gaines and Bigelow, all across the board, were supportive of our positions on these bills. And that is what I've got.
Got a couple of things to it. You weren't in the Water Management Committee meeting, were you?
I was not. I had to go to, I think that was there.
Yeah. John Mills commented about the water conservation, and they've run some figures on how much can actually be saved. And he had one figure as low as 12,000 acre-feet a year. That works out to 90 gallons per person per year to be saved. And he thinks that the cost of it is really
Literally a drop in a bucket.
Yeah. One other thing, I have the booklet that they gave us, and there's a lot of information in here about the JPIA, and I've got some things here that have some charts and things that'll show you a lot of the expenditures and trends. If anybody wants to look at those, they can. And Dwayne, I've got some good news and some bad news for you.
All right.
Good news is the administration is withdrawing the waters of the U.S. to further look at, and so that's probably off the board now.
That's good.
Yeah. Now the state, California Department of the Water Resources Control Board is now looking at establishing waters of California.
Putting their own layer in, yeah. We can't possibly have that go away, so we'll do it locally.
So,
Yeah, I've got a puddle on the lot next to me. It's about 3 feet by 4 feet.
yeah, you better go.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, fill it in with gravel.
I know Felicia pretty well too. Go see her. I wouldn't help
Okay.
it. Really well. She used to be in transportation. Yeah, I know her pretty well.
Anybody else on board member reports?
I've got some quick ones.
Oh, that's right, Dwayne had something.
I wanted to make sure that we mentioned to you all that when we talk with the city, they're very interested in us doing something with our transfer fee on the sewer units. As you know, that we used to have it and then it sunsetted, but there's a lot of, I think, commercial uses as well as uses for affordable housing that we're missing on. They're out there. We're not getting any monthly fees for them. I think we had to find a way to get them into play. And one example of that is I was just having a burger, as I'm apt to do from time to time, and these people were sitting next to me, and we were just talking about something, and pretty soon they were talking about the utility district and how they opened a little coffee shop on Pioneer Trail and how nicely they were treated by our utility district, but how if the fee had been what it was before, they would not be opening their business. That they had to come up with 16 grand or something like that, and if it had been double that, they would have been out of business. They wouldn't have opened. And so that's a small example of what we were talking about when we did what we did. We got a few bucks coming in that wouldn't have come in. So we're pricing ourselves better in the market. You know, we have customers we're trying to reach. Our prices were too high, so they didn't do business with us. Now they're at a little bit lower rate, and they're doing business with us. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Jim has been talking about for a long time, when we had the problem out in the Keys, it became clear that, especially when they talked about how far below the water table our lines are and how caustic the sewage is coming in from that direction, and it's just common sense that at some point we're going to have a as bad or worse cave-in. And I got to thinking as I walk down to the beach a lot, and I see our lines right next to the water, and sometimes almost right in the water due to the high water table. And here's what I'm thinking. I would like for us to take a look at whether there's any funds available for us to do the right thing, which is to take those lines and move them somewhere else and get funding for it on an environmental basis. Because when they were built right in the marshes, right in the yuck, right under the water table, sometimes 10 feet under. And I'd like to see something. We could maybe even do it along with fixing some of the city streets if we moved the lines in. I only speak from a layman's knowledge of where the lines are, but I'd like for us at some point to just take a look at whether there might be money available for us to move our lines out of the environmentally sensitive places. And the other is, I found out this morning, I get a phone call that they're going to do another VHR initiative that will, I think, allow a little bit. I only heard of it, I didn't see it in writing, but it'll allow VHRs in the tourist area, but eventually, within a short period of time, none in the rest of the town. So it's kind of a shot fired over the bow. They weren't satisfied with what they thought the city council should have come up with in a compromise.
I talked a couple of weeks ago to probably the same local agitator you did, and that's what they're heading toward, is a ballot measure.
Yeah, I mean, this is not really sewer district business, but I beg them to come up with a reasonable initiative. Pick something that's a reasonable number, that has reasonable ability, and you would get people like me or you or on board, so our community had a reasonable answer, because the council's answer evidently didn't satisfy everybody. So it looks like Armageddon's going to happen over the second initiative, because you've got the realtors especially on one side, and people with everybody complains about VHRs. It could be a real division in the community that could be avoided by people who were more reasonable at the negotiating table. Like I said, it's not our issue. It's just going to be a big one. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Wayne.
Well, how about we make a response on one item about the sewer crossings? Yeah, we had our CIP meeting yesterday, and I think we have a project in our CIP agenda that was presented by John in the engineering department to actually take a specific look at. We have 159, 160 crossings of SEZs and rivers in our sewer system. That's our forced mains, gravity mains, and export line. And basically, the item is to do a condition assessment on them to see, what's happening. And
camera trucks.
But I know what it's going to find.
Well, if you remember, back 10, 15 years ago, the Corps of Engineers had several individuals that were in this basin full-time, and basically what they were doing is they were trying to drum up the condition assessments, the cataloging of our lines, because everybody else's lines who were in the shore zone. So that shore zone was one of the key phrases. And they actually searched for getting federal money into the basin to try to relocate, to do something with these shore zone lines. But the only project I remember them ever being successful on getting money was they got money for it to help IVGID replace a portion of their export line. Like we did with our A line and B line, they did the same thing, and because they had leaks out of their export line, and they got some federal money through a Corps of Engineers grant. But they were here for so long and were so unsuccessful other than that even the staff at Lahontan got tired of dealing with no action, and they basically they're gone. They're no longer around. But interestingly enough, Alan Miller over at Mahan was one of the long-term staff members over there. It's always been a bugaboo with him and some of the other staff about all of our river and creek crossings and everything else, and wanting us to get them out of the creeks and get them out of the SEZs. He actually just sent to Evo an email this week asking about it. Evo sent him information on this CIP item and actually elicited his support in looking for grant monies to proceed with the assessment of these lines and to potentially do something about some of them. So it's out there, and it was a little worrisome in that the email from Alan Miller said, well, we asked you about this 2 years ago, and we haven't heard anything about it yet. We're talking, if you were talking about moving...
$100 million.
Exactly. Probably $1 million per crossing it would take to actually get our lines out. And when you think about it, they have to cross the rivers. You'd be moving them up and hanging them on Caltrans bridges, or building pipe bridges across the river, or something, if you wanted to eliminate, like all these crossings of the river.
Or do the best you could.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the, in our defense, because I remember well, the Corps of Engineers, they couldn't decide whether to wind their watch or go to lunch, And so, because they're headed up by two separate people, there's a political appointee and the military appointee, and they just fought like crazy, and nothing was getting done, and we couldn't get them to do anything or to be slightly cooperative. So in our defense, they just weren't worth dealing with at the time, and they still might not be. I just think the bottom line is eventually it's going to happen. And so as good stewards of this system, we need to look at it and at least know what the cost is. We might say, okay, we've looked at it and the cost is impossible, but 20 years from now when we're gone, something's going to happen, or maybe 5 or 10, I don't know. I just think it's in our best interest to not ignore it. One thing might be to change the pH or something of the water that flows through, or, there might be some other physical solutions we could do. But those pipes aren't getting any newer.
Right. And we have it as part of our expectation or asset management program. We have a lot of up and coming new technologies for inspections. We have untethered acoustical camera option from Austria that we're already in dialogue with the people who have the technology who are going to come and be able, and we have it scheduled that we're going to be.
That's a great start.
We're going to be sending a camera down like the Tahoe Keys force main from the Tahoe Keys station down to the Altala station through this, if you have it on a line, it'd be impossible. It's going to be able to float down. We'll shoot it through there with flow from fire hydrants, get a picture, get a sounding of that force main, and find out, this is a force main that's been in operation for decades. It's been running full. We've had, up till this time, we've had no ability to inspect the inside of it. Well, we're going to get with this technology, we'll hopefully get a nice picture and a sounding of the pipe thickness and know what kind of condition this line's in. That's one example.
That's great.
But a lot of these crossings, what we're talking about doing is an exterior view. It's like the Tahoe Creek. At Tahoe Creek, we have a force main that's extremely exposed in the river, just yards from the edge of the lake. And the reason why it was exposed in the drought, the lake level got so low, people were using the encasement of our sewer line as a bridge to cross over the creek. Well, now it's under 5 feet of water. And so it's kind of difficult to sort of put an exterior protection on the encasement, but that's a project we have under design this year, and if the lake level drops, we'll actually install it next year. We're already doing something about it, but that's one example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I didn't mean, and of course, I didn't mean to be critical. I'm so happy with the professionals we have here. I've just been taking a few walks out there in the fall and thought, something? I'll give it to you this time. Jim's right. But I'm also not interested in just raising rates willy-nilly before we know what it is we have before us.
Condition assessment is the key, and that's why I was behind that new camera truck we bought, because we need to know what we have.
And if I could jump in real quick about that topic, our expectation with this new camera is we're going to deploy it. We're going to hit a bunch of the system. Obviously, we're not going to have completed an assessment of the entire system before our next 218 process.
Right.
By next year. We'll get what we consider to be a reasonable sampling done, draw some conclusions from that, and ask for some funding that's appropriate for repairs that we see that we need at a certain pace. But over that next 5-year period, we will have looked at every pipe in our system, every gravity line in our system, and I actually have some hope that with this new technology, we will have looked at every force main as well. And so we will have eyes on and a condition assessment based on CCTV of every stick of pipe in the system. It's going to take us that long to do it at a reasonable pace unless we want to dump a ton of money into having people come in as consultants and look at our system and give us information. I think it's a very reasonable and appropriate approach for the system that we have for the issues that we've seen. I'll also say, those gravity lines that are along the creeks in the meadows and in the along the shorelines, you think about that those are not pressurized lines. So, what leaks as far as leaks out is when the line is pressurized, then it's creating more pressure and it's pushing the sewage out. Our gravity sewer lines, for the most part, they're not leaking out, water's leaking in.
Yeah.
And that's what the problem is with those gravity lines. And where the problem becomes an issue is when there's too much flow and those lines now can't carry all the flow that's coming into it because of a storm event, water dumping into the manhole, then you get leaks, or when you've got a plug because people are flushing diapers down the toilet or things like that, or we get a bunch of grease and we get a plug that stops the line and we get leakage out of those manholes. But by identifying with our hydro cleaning program and identifying with the TV camera areas where there are issues, we can minimize a lot of that, which is why we don't have the spill rate that most agencies have. Knock on wood. We've been very fortunate and successful with our maintenance program. Our underground repair sewer crews have done a fantastic job with the resources they've had in the past. We're continuing to try and invest in additional resources for them to get more resources available to do more cleaning and to do more TVing and do more condition assessment so that we can stay ahead of the issue that I think we have been ahead of in the past. But with this deteriorating infrastructure, we're at that point where we got to start getting back ahead of it. And again, we plan on bringing to you more information about what we need to make sure that we're staying ahead of that curve in the future in the coming years.
Well, I appreciate it. And you guys have told me all this in the past, but I think my own just walk it along kind of brought it home, and then we had the accident. And I've talked to some of our managers and employees who are concerned, and so that makes sense to, and I just don't want to put my head into sand and pretend like something doesn't exist. On the other hand, I understand how people, when they're sitting at their dining room table trying to pay their bills, need us to consider that.
Got a question, a comment. Of the 150 some crossings, what would be the total length of those? We have 340 miles of sewer lines.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
330. How many lineal feet?
And moving into the roads could be a problem too, because you get vibrations from trucks, weight from traffic. There's other things that can cause problems moving them closer to society. Yeah.
Probably the biggest issue, though, particularly with the gravity line, is if there was a road nearby, okay, well then it's a slight movement, but to really get a lot of these lines out of the stream environment literally takes a complete redesign of the collection system, because you're talking about and probably creating a bunch of pump stations so that you don't have this. That's what they did, is they followed the gravity, they followed the river down to bring all of the wastewater to our plant.
On the other
to
hand,
eliminate that, you're talking about building a bunch of pump stations.
What I was thinking, and I thought about that too, you're right. But when we go to have to actually replace them, which will eventually come, maybe a group of people that are be sitting here that won't be us, they're going to have to do one of the most environmentally sensitive rip-ups in the history of this basin.
Well, the last pump station we added, if you remember, back in '97, remember we had that big rain on snow event?
I remember it, yeah.
And all the tree trunks washing down the upper Truckee River. The flows had the highest recorded in that river at that point was up on, the water was living up onto the highway. It ripped out a sewer crossing on Ponderosa, at the end of Ponderosa Street. That was carrying a segment behind the golf course, the miniature golf course in the park. That little segment was going back across the river to the Tahoe pump station, and then was being pumped back through the Tahoe force main to the Tahoe pump station. And when that sewer line got ripped out by the tree trunks, there was no sewer service for that area. So when we proposed to go back in and replace it, FEMA said, you have an alternative. You can build a pump station at the end of Ponderosa Street and intercept that flow that was headed back across the river, collect it, and then pump it from the Ponderosa station to the Tahoe pump station, and not go all the way back to the Keys. And that's what we ended up getting FEMA money to do. That was millions of dollars to eliminate that one crossing.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it's so expensive. And that's what the city has done with their, spouse medical, lifetime medical. They put their head in the sand, and then it became a huge, huge problem for them. And that's all I'm saying is let's take a good look now. At least we'll know. And
From a replacement standpoint in the future, thinking about, again, lines that are in the meadows and close to environmentally sensitive areas, if you're familiar with the pipe bursting technology, you're familiar with that at all? Yeah. And so there's an opportunity to do some replacements without doing doing a big project in the meadow, right? Is to go in, basically burst the pipe that is there and drag a new pipe behind that underground without doing that excavation. But that's also after, quite honestly, in my mind, doing a lining project. So to me, a lot of the issues that we're going to be looking at, my expectation is that we're probably going to be handling a lot of that with these cure-in-place liners. The next round of that, if there's not sufficient capacity in that pipe, because now we've lined it and we're making it a little bit smaller, the next round may be aligning again, but then the next round after that may be pipe bursting.
But we did it out here.
Right, exactly.
We pulled one under the line. I saw that with that mud.
Yes. Yeah, was that directional drilling, or was that actually bursting?
It was actually directional drilling.
It was directional drilling, and we pulled a pipe.
Yeah.
Right behind it, but they actually have a technology now where basically you put you dig down to that pipe in one location, you put a head on it, and it actually it will grind through and demolish the existing pipe, so it just follows the existing pipeline and removes it or bursts it, and then drags another pipe behind it. And so you're in exactly the same location with a new pipe. Yeah, you got to dig at the ends, and you have to dig up every service connection as of today, although they're working on technologies so that you don't have to dig back up every service connection. But there are some technologies out there that they're actually widely used today, but they're still refining them, and they will continue to improve as time goes on and become more and more effective and efficient, so that you're not having to do a big meadow dig in order to replace a line in the future. So I think that's probably that would be my expectation for how we would handle some of those issues as we go forward. I don't foresee us doing a big excavation project in a meadow or on the lake shore. I could be wrong. There certainly can be drivers that will force us to do that, but that would be my expectation for how we would handle those kind of issues in the future, given the technologies we have today.
Okay.
340 miles of asbestos lines. Are we going to be able to do pipe busting and leave all that asbestos in the ground?
Sure. Typically, my understanding and expectation is yes, we can, because the way to deal with asbestos piping is really to encapsulate it and just not expose people to the friable nature of asbestos materials in general. And so if it's buried in the ground and it's encapsulated, it's not causing a problem for anybody.
Encapsulated?
Just by leaving it in the ground, by not exposing, you're not exposing human beings to it. You're not exposing the environment to it, so it stays there and it's fine.
Migrate at all?
What's that?
It's not going to migrate at all?
Not to my knowledge. It's just like stone or anything
I
else.
just-
It doesn't.
I think
To my
it's
knowledge,
all
it's,
on will.
I've never heard of that being an issue with asbestos as far as it actually moving in the groundwater or anything to that effect.
You'd probably get an exemption or a preferred alternative out of it.
With the 340 miles to replace it, total cost, if we were going to replace the whole thing, probably be about $450 million.
So we'd only have to raise rates by,
But that's if you're going to replace everything and rebuild the system. But it'd be something less than that, but it's going to be 100 or 200 million probably. Yeah.
I agree. So we might be able to, right now, from what I'm told from the Clintox people, is that they're just looking, I mean, we're not on the timeline that would work, but they're just looking for projects to shove out the door. They want people working. And so finding something like this might be a win-win on both sides of the aisle.
No, we can't really discuss it today, but I'd like to look at doing something perhaps this next year. I think we need to talk at some point whether we're going to wait another year to start another 218, or are we going to start raising some money, because we have a lot of other things besides just pipelines. We've got old pump stations that are obsolete that need to be totally rebuilt, and we may need to raise the rates this coming year. I know that Shannon won't have all the figures, but maybe by April or May, maybe we'll have some idea of where we're going, and that maybe we have a discussion at that point whether we want to wait for another year, which I don't think we should be waiting.
But yeah, those are already scheduled. That whole series leading up to that is already planned for. So that discussion will happen. Kelly, anything new at the El Dorado County?
No, we don't have a meeting in December.
Yeah.
And,
Take December off.
yeah, I think they usually try to do, unless there's an emergency, they don't have a December meeting.
And I think I mentioned last time that they're moving their offices, the offices.
Yeah, we discussed that last time.
I saw Ken Payne, who's the new general manager. He seems to be excited about moving ahead. I mean, he's in the right frame of mind, and I think he'll do a really good job. And he wants to. It looks like he's going to not hire staff, but
That's right.
use consultants more. Now, I'm not sure how that'll work. What's motives too?
It seemed like he stayed in the interim position long enough that he really got engaged with the issues and really kind of excited about the regional perspectives and partnerships and yeah.
He said more than once that it was the best, probably the best time of his career.
Yeah.
The projects he's working on.
I'm really glad they found it.
Yeah. So he's talked about, he's talking about, planning to stay there for the next 5 years,
And being able to mentor.
And then mentor a replacement.
Okay, Richard, I think you're up next.
Yeah, just a couple items before I introduce, we got other staff reports. We talked about water conservation, just our last report in for November is the lowest total production that we've had since 1987. I guess Heavenly wasn't using that much water for snowmaking, but it was 9% below 2013, the base year for all the water conservation measures. So because our customers are still hanging in there with some of their water savings. And then we just
What
wanted...
was that number, the flow?
9% less than 2013. It was like.
I was just. You have a total.
91 million gallons.
Do they use the water out of their lake? That might have been real full.
They do. They have some service storage facilities up there. Then I think what they do is they use that water first before they start importing and paying us for the water.
Might have been it.
Yeah. So then maybe they didn't.
I'm not sure they had cold enough days.
Yeah. I mean.
Yeah.
Of late, it's been,
recently that they had.
But back in November, I don't think they had enough cold weather to make a lot of snow. Just wanted to, I'll introduce the topic. We wanted to just bring up this data on a solar energy evaluation we have done here at the plant. Sage Renewables, I think you've probably heard about it. Sage Renewables for $2,500 did real preliminary look at at the doing solar panels at the wastewater treatment plant. They looked at installing them out in the holding ponds, and they were looking at doing what was called a behind the meters project, so that we wouldn't be in a situation where we're trying to sell it back to Liberty, but we would just be using all the energy we generated on our site, ourselves, and therefore get the maximum value out of the energy produced by just not buying that from Liberty. And then if that looked okay, then they were going to move on to a more in-depth study. So Shannon has some figures that he had brought up on his phone to share with you on the results of that analysis.
So they did look at our whole plant facility, properties associated with this particular property, looking at putting it in various areas, solar installation in various areas. The two areas that they were really interested in was the ERBs, the already cleared area, and the boneyard area. Unfortunately, the boneyard, we have to develop the boneyard someplace else. So we pretty quickly nixed that idea as not being a viable solution. And so they focused their assessment and their evaluation on the ERBs back here and just basically installing fixed cells in that location. And they came up with, and they basically evaluated over a 25-year life cycle for solar cells, the production impacted by the snow, what those kind of numbers would be, and what it boiled down to. And they looked at 3 different funding alternatives, cash, and bonds, etc. And over that 25-year period, it would have ended up costing us at a minimum $840,000 to pay cash up front for that installation, and then funded it with funded with bond about $775,000 to the negative over the course of that 25-year period. So it doesn't meet the requirement that the board set out previously. It's that we do require energy projects that they pay for themselves, and particularly within the lifetime of the project. The solar project is not. It would save 400 tons of carbon a year, about 9,000 over 25 years. My opinion is that it's probably not worth $800,000 to our ratepayers, but want to present that information to you. If you want us to go farther, certainly if you'd like to see that report, we'll definitely pass that on to you. And they had sent us the draft report, and we changed some things and they finalized it, so right now that's the final.
Yeah, I'd rather use that money on stuff we need.
We're just using solar panels, or were they talking about storage batteries?
It was looking at that.
It was?
There's some discussion of that. I'll have to.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah,
I don't.
was not looking at it. There was some discussion of batteries, but I have to. It wasn't.
Because I don't think we necessarily needed it that much, but they were talking about just generating power to use on the site. And since you're only generating...
If it's in excess during the day, you can use that overnight, when there's no solar.
The program that they looked at was producing less than our total average. So with that, all by us.
And it's, we've had other solar panel providers do their own analysis over the years. And it's just like the export line. We've had, if you remember, we had a number of studies done on the export line, to double check, when energy prices change, maybe, grant programs change, make sure that we're not missing something. Well, obviously we didn't do, sea hydro out in Alpine County until we got the same answer back, which is once you put a line in, then just the upsizing or the upgrade of the pressure grading on the pipe allows you to generate sea hydro. and then that's cost effective, but not having to put a new line in to generate it. That's not cost effective. So we can put this on a schedule where we double check, check the figures every so often, every 5 years or so, just to make sure we're not missing an opportunity to actually make money for our customers. From following your guidelines, if it doesn't pay for itself and within the time frame of the facilities, that we will not proceed with design or construction of those facilities unless you want to give us a different direction.
One of the problems is that we have to deal with Liberty Energy.
Yeah.
A lot of other treatment plants they're in PG&E or Southern California Edison that are working, and they're happy with it. So it's
two drivers for this, the lack of revenue, I'll say, it was certainly the snow conditions that we have to deal with, and also actually the cost that we're paying for power is in their mind is fairly low compared to other entities around the state.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, Liberty hasn't been anxious to contribute or being partners with the green energy projects, but because of that, I guess in my mind they're small and they're not a very what I would call sophisticated electrical provider. But their prices are lower than a lot of the other utility providers in the state of California, which and again contributes to solar energy not being cost effective here where it might be elsewhere.
they got dirty electricity.
Well, that's our electrical provider, though. We don't,
We don't choose them.
Yeah. So, other staff report. Chris has a staff report on information about our maintenance agreements up at the Crescent Valley Tank, and his experiences on that. And so we're handing out a document from when we actually, the last time we went through and rebuilt that tank, agreement from 1994 on our level of responsibility out there.
So, we'll do it later.
Don't know.
Okay.
Good afternoon. We've had some things out at Christmas Valley Tank Road. Are you guys all familiar with our easement and the tank and everything up there? Nope.
I don't know about the
No.
easement.
Yeah. Well, out in Myers, Christmas Valley Tank Road is what we call it. We have a tank up at the top. In 1994, 95, right in there, they rebuilt the tank and we ran a water line and some electrical conduit up the road, which is basically a private road. So the district went in and got easements from 4 different customers up there. And the main customer that we really dealt with and had the biggest agreement with is Shields up at the top. I understand Mrs. Shields, the mother there, has passed away since, but her daughter is in charge of the estate now and the house and everything up there. But long story short, ever since Ken Schroeder was here, which was 10 plus years ago, and he was the manager who had my position back then, and then we had Rick Heydrich, then Randy Curtis, now myself. Ever since back when Ken Schroeder was in charge, some of the people up there on that road didn't quite understand the extent of the agreement, I believe, that we have with them. And what it's boiling down to basically is just giving you a heads up that you're not caught in a grocery store or somewhere, that over the years we're responsible for the road and the ditches, but that's maintenance of the road, the asphalt, the ditches, making sure everything flows, everything's in decent shape. We do have an agreement with Shields up at on the top of the mountain for snow removal, but in order to get up to the top you have to go up the road through the other houses to get up to the top to clear it for it. On page 2, at the bottom there, I highlighted some wording, and with the Brewbakers who live halfway up the hill, the gentleman Gary Wendell at the bottom of the hill, then another gentleman up on the corner, we have an easement through their property, but we don't have an agreement as far as snow plowing. But we still have to snow plow in order to open up for Shields. So basically what's happened is over the years, we went up and we sanded the road for them a couple times, just as a favor, you know, the bad years, icy years, snow, all that. So we sanded a few times. Well, that's turned around now, and they're under the impression basically that it is a requirement of us to send people up there every time it snows to sand. And now at the end of the year, this last summer, I got a bill from the gentleman at the bottom for, at that point, it was $600 to come clean up his yard, because the whole mountain drains down to his yard, and he actually has a ditch that goes around that's been there before we were even up there. It's just a main channel that takes off. So what we're looking at is, I believe we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money and resources up there for something that I don't believe that we are really responsible for, I guess you would say. It's getting to the point now where, like I said, they expect us to come up there and clean their yards. Things like that for a favor that we did years ago is now, in their opinion, a requirement. So just wanted to give you a heads up that we're kind of looking in a different direction as far as what our responsibilities up there are. So I didn't want you guys to get caught at the grocery store or somewhere like that going, hey, what's going on here? Right now, that's what's going on.
And Chris, the gentleman at the bottom who has requested that we pay him to have his yard cleaned, his complaint was, if I recall correctly, that because we'd sanded the road the sand got washed down the road into his yard, and then he had to have it cleaned up, had to pay somebody to clean that up. That's correct. That's why he wanted us to pay for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And then,
What did we tell him?
well, at that point, what had happened was, I can't say that we were perfect on all of our decisions either. What had happened was, the gentleman had called at the beginning of the summer and said that he had a bunch of debris in his yard. So I had Tony, my water crew supervisor, send some guys out, take a look, go out to talk to him. They went out there, they couldn't visibly see anything that stuck out as, you know, a bunch of piles or anything like that. They knocked on the door and nobody answered. But there's no excuse. They left and we got busy doing other things and never went back because we didn't see any red flags, basically. So he sent us a letter saying that nobody had contacted him. He's got a lot of medical issues, and if we don't pay by September 1st, we'll see you in court. So I called the gentleman and told him that, yes, you know, we didn't follow through. Nobody was home the day. We didn't see anything. So I told him I needed an invoice. He just sent me a letter and marked on it, I'll see you in court if you don't pay this. Well, I need an invoice. So I wasn't opposed to taking a look at the invoice because of the circumstances. But I asked him, the person who did the work, if he was a licensed contractor. He said no. Okay, well, have the gentleman fill out an invoice detailed on what you did, hours, what you're charging me, not just a rough $600 figure. I've never heard back from him. He's never given me an invoice, anything like that. Now, also up there on that road, the last couple years, the road needs to be repaved. And we have money budgeted this year. We had the CIP meetings yesterday to go in this year and hopefully do some drainage work and maybe a 2-inch overlay on the road. That is our responsibility. I did have some of the crew out over the summer with weed eaters, things like that, cleaning out the ditches to get the water flowing better. So we have done some work, but the last couple years we've had an increase of groundwater up there on that mountain, and it's coming out of the road. And one part of the road in between the two houses, Brubaker and Gary's, a spring started, and it took out a lot of the road, about a 30-foot high by 10-foot wide section. So we went in there and we put a perforated pipe in with some rock and, you know, wrapped it all up and stuff and got it working. We had, I believe, I don't remember the contractor, but it was our paving contractor a couple years ago. He came out and we paved that section, which $15,000-$20,000 to pave it back up and make it look nice. Well, the water just found a different route, and it just ruined our $15,000-$20,000 pavement job. So we've kind of held off last year and this year so we can go in and look at where this water is and see what we can do to prevent it. I don't want to go up and spend $100,000 in asphalt for a new road, and then next year we have water coming out of it and it's ruined it. So what we're doing is since then we've installed 3 different crossings, and I had some guys out there working today trying to divert water from the ground into the ditches. And so far it's working. And like I said, next year we will be out there to pave and get things squared away nice and neat. So, when you do hear that there are some chunks of asphalt missing, there are. But it's not like there's a 2 foot hole deep holes that you have to drive through that can suck a car in. So, like I said, it just basically heads up for you that we've dealt with a lot of these people since 10, 12 years ago, and it seems that we tried to do a favor, and now it seems like maybe it's being taken advantage of a little bit more.
The key phrase is grantee sole discretion.
Yes.
So, why? No
Well,
good
now,
deed goes unpunished, does
With the
it?
groundwater coming out of the road, I feel, and Shannon and Richard both feel, they agree, water coming out of the road, it's creating ice. You'll get a 3 or 4 foot or 3 or 4 inch ice slick down the hill. So we went up yesterday and we sanded. They didn't let us know that the water was running again until yesterday. When I found out, we jumped on it. We sanded last night. I sent a crew out this morning. We've kind of got the water under control at this point. So we do what we can and what we're supposed to do. But it seems like over the years, you do a favor, now it's a mandatory thing that we have to do. And I'm not sure that that's the correct way to spend public money all the time.
And how often? Yeah, we can't gift public funds.
Exactly.
They might also go to the store and say, "Oh, you wouldn't believe it. We got the district, shoveling our driveways for us. It's great."
That's another thing I'm afraid of. This, like I said, has been going on for 3 different managers in this position. And we've always just kind of, we're not out to make any customers
of course
mad.
not.
If anything, we should be accused of bending over backwards for a lot of them. But I believe there's a time where we need to just kind of stand up and take a look at what exactly we're spending money on.
And just one question. I mean, this is micromanaging, so I'll back off real quick. How often would you normally go up there? Would it be every snowstorm? Would it be every day?
To sand for them?
No, just if they weren't there and we had the tank there, how often would you go and check the tank?
I don't know that they check the tank every day. To tell you, I think it's more like maybe a couple times a week.
Okay.
But because of our agreement with the house up on top, we have 72 hours after every storm to get out there and plow all the streets, which we normally do the day after, or during the storm. We'll go through, we plow it, turn around, come back in the afternoon and plow again. So it's quite often. But as far as sanding the road, I've driven up it a few times when it was deemed undrivable, so it's not really. So it's kind of a fine line with customers. We're not out to make anybody mad, but yet, should we be doing this for every easement that we have, every customer? It just getting to the point where it might be going a little too far. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's what you said.
And Sarah and Cherry, their method, maybe it's good, maybe it wasn't, I don't know, was to leave a lot of details out to make an agreement kind of simple. And so they didn't put in details, if you notice, in something like this. It's just a theory they had. I remember them saying it. And maybe it was, but if you run into details, then, but grantee's sole discretion is pretty clear to me.
And like I said,
but if you do it, then it becomes, in court, that might make it a prescription.
Yes, I've sent all this to Gary in his office to take a look at it.
You might consider having to clean this stuff up maybe next year.
just sent a letter to those folks clarifying what it says and what the district's location already, so it's trying to clear the air a little bit.
Yes, I had a phone conversation with one of the tenants up there yesterday and explained a little bit where we were coming from with public funds, things like that. Long story short, it didn't go very well.
But in that call, you identified that there actually was a problem we felt we were responsible for, which was the groundwater coming out of the road at a valve box or a meter pit. And you guys were up there today, put in another French drain or under drain, and have stopped that groundwater from coming out of the road. With the hope and expectation that the roadway, as far as the air of the roadway, is no longer going to slide. Icing
You
problem.
wind up that
Snow
hill.
falls on it, and if it drives on it, icens up. That's
Yeah,
not the
going up
problem.
over Echo.
But to make it to the
It-
road,
it-
there's
there's a
such
chain
that
that
it's
sits
not
up
causing
there.
a problem, and therefore.
So the homeowners have, there's only 2 or 3 very wealthy families that live there.
Snow removal.
Yeah.
At the top of the bill, that they've had no
Been there.
complaints about what our service and what we've been doing over the years. It's the folks at the bottom, we actually don't have a snow removal agreement with, who are the ones who are.
Yes. And like I said, we're not out to get any customers, don't get me wrong. That's the last thing that anybody here at the district wants to do. But it just feels like over the years this has escalated and it's to the point now where maybe we should kind of take a step back and take a look on what we're doing is all.
Besides, your reference to giving public funds, that sort of thing, there's this kind of situation that could
It's a steep road.
You are correct. It is a steep road. Everything off the top of the mountain comes right down through there. So, like I said, just a heads up for you. Any suggestions in the future, anything like that, I'm all ears. Please.
Guess we could rewrite the agreements with them
Thanks.
or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's,
I know
I don't know
what
if I'd
they-
want to go down that road or not.
I know what they want, but what they get it.
We are going to change it up a little bit. In the past years, when we plow, we go up there with backhoes, and it's tearing up the road over here, trying to scrape all the ice off, things like that. So the Bobcat that you authorized us to purchase, we purchased a snow blower for it, and it just arrived 2 days ago. It's a big snow blower. And at one point we thought, instead of up there scraping on the road and creating berms and things like that, maybe we could contract out to Alpine Smith with their snow blowers to go up there, because Alpine Smith goes up to the top and does from where our tank is into Shield's house. So we thought, maybe we'll just have them go up and you can blow the snow so there's no berms, see if that makes a difference. But that was $3,750 a year for them to do that. The snowblower we just bought was $7,000. So instead of spending more money after talking with Shannon, spending the money, the $3,750 to pay somebody to go do it, we now have a blower. So I'd like to take the next couple of years, utilize the piece of equipment that you let us buy, and in 2 years we'll pay for that snowblower compared to paying somebody else to do it. So we are going to try something a little different. We are trying to work with them. So, that's about where it's at right now. So, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Was there any other staff reports or anything?
Just a reminder, they have 22 years old ago, Penn State, they're like working on this, there.
We did discuss that with the city people at the last meeting. Mhm. And that's what we surmise is why it's taken so long. There's an internal battle going on.
Patty has told me so.
Yeah.
And
Patty Cornigan.
the city's trying to pull a snake out of the hole with our hand. You know, we've got to be careful.
Not afraid of snakes, are you?
No, I can do it. But that's what's going on. They're looking for backup, and we have to be a little bit careful about. Lahontan has no love for us.
Well, that's why I suggested the city play dumb and go. But anyway, okay. Anything else, guys? You can see on the list past and future meetings, and if nobody has anything else to say, meeting adjourned.